Welcome back or welcome to the Surf Mastery Podcast, the podcast that helps you to be a better surfer in and out of the water. I am your host, Michael Frampton, and today's guest is David Litt. David is the former speechwriter for President Obama, and he wrote a book called It's Only Drowning, a true story of learning to surf and the search for common ground. It's also on Audible. I listened to the audio version. Not only is David a great writer, obviously, and this is a good book, but he's also very well spoken, and he does read this book as the author. And without further ado, I shall give you my conversation with David Litt. Still surfing?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm in Washington, D.C., but I was in New Jersey just a couple of days ago, and I was out actually with my brother-in-law. We went out, and it was good. It's gotten cold, but it's also gotten less crowded, so it kind of works out, right? That's the trade-off in Jersey is in the winter, the crowds go away, but every time you get, you take a set on the head, you have the worst ice cream headache of your life.
Yeah, it gets cold there, all right? Like really, really cold.
Yeah.
Ice floating down the Hudson and into the sea.
I think the coldest I've surfed in is probably like 35 degrees. So what? That's something like 0 or 1
Yeah,
Celsius.
just doesn't get much
And
colder, really.
yeah, it's basically ice cold.
Yeah.
Although it's one thing that I like about surfing on the East Coast in the US is one way you can kind of prove that you belong is if you're a new surfer, you don't necessarily need skill if you're willing to show up when it's really miserable out, right? You get a certain kind of respect just for being there. And you get more respect if you can actually surf, I've heard. But hopefully I'll discover that firsthand one day soon.
Yeah. Well, surfing it's a hard sport.
I think it's one of those things, if I had known how difficult surfing is when I started, I definitely would not have started, especially at 35 years old. So I'm really glad that I had no idea because I've gotten so much out of it. But if I had known how difficult this was going to be, I never would have signed up for it in the first place.
So when was the point, like the tipping point of that? Because obviously you were motivated to start, and then you got to a point where you're like, oh man, this is hard. There must have been times where you thought, I'm just going to give up.
Yeah, some of it I think is the cliche, right? That first wave you catch, even if it's just you're in the whitewater and you look back on it a few years later and you're like, maybe that was all of 4 or 5 seconds, but there's something pretty remarkable about it. And I think what I really fell in love with quickly was that sense that when you're up on a board, you're like in a different dimension, right? I always feel like it's almost like a door to Narnia opens up, right? It's just this different place. And I started surfing at a time in my life where I was I just kind of gotten out of, or was maybe getting out of, the only real episode of true depression that I've ever gone through. And it was really tough. I mean, really, really tough. And so I think the idea of being somewhere else was more attractive than ever. And that absolutely hooked me in, right? That feeling of, okay, you're up on the board, that you're in this entirely new reality, and then the ride ends and you're like, how do I get back there, right? That was a big part of it. And I think the other thing honestly was I was surfing with my brother-in-law. He's a good surfer. I knew I was going to see him for the rest of my life, and I knew that if I chickened out, he would kind of judge me for it. And I was like, I cannot let that happen. And that was a very powerful motivator, right? I talked to other people who learned to surf as an adult without a family member who was always going to kind of roll their eyes a little bit if they gave up, and I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to that original flow state that you felt, and you connected with the ocean, and your mind went blank for a few seconds on that ride, and it's that feeling that we chase. It's so much more than a sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was one of the hardest things in the book actually because you you don't want to call surfing a sport because that seems to diminish it, but then you don't quite know. There's not enough other words to just. You don't want to say an activity or a hobby or whatever. And weirdly, right, writing a book about surfing, there are lots of challenges, but one of the biggest challenges was when you're describing the category of things that surfing falls into. What do you call it? And I don't even know that I succeeded in that. I think sometimes I just said, okay, I'll call it a sport in this sentence, and then but it was every time I did, I felt like it's like, no, it's not quite doing it justice, right?
That's I think that's part of the allure of surfing.
Hmm.
I like to describe. I think it's an art, simply.
Yeah. Well, you haven't seen me surf, but yes, it can be. I've certainly seen people surf and think that's, and it is a for people when I watch good surfers, and I wouldn't say that I am especially artistic on a board yet. Maybe one day, but I do think I have an appreciation for that art that I didn't have before. So I will watch someone now and not just say like, oh, they look like they're good at surfing, but have a sense that they're expressing themselves via surfing, and that's cool, right? Like there's some other sports like that, or some other pastimes, whatever you want to call it, like that. But it's if you're a distance runner, it's less about self-expression, I think, even though there's lots of things to recommend it.
Yeah, I think surfing's more akin to music because
Hmm.
there's plenty of good artists or musicians who are very famous and have written great songs, but they're not technically very good musicians. like
Mm.
like the punk rock era, where they just sort of choose a line and they stick to it and they get very good at that particular style of music, let's say, but they might not even know what chords they're playing or
Yeah.
anything like that. And I think that's the beauty of surfing is it's definitely a sport if you want to ride a performance shortboard and enter competitions. But anything
Hmm.
outside of that, really, you choose whatever surfboard you like and whatever beach and style of surfing that you like, and you can specialize in that and get reasonably proficient. You might not be able to go to
Yeah.
Hawaii and surf a performance shortboard, but man, if you can, ride some waist high or shoulder high nice waves on a longboard and you do it well, you're still technically an artist and a surfer.
Absolutely. It's one of the things that I actually struggled with surfing because I tend to be the kind of person who says, okay, I'm doing a thing right now. I want to get better. I want to, keep progressing, not in the most technical sense of, I want to be able to pop up on a slightly steeper wave, but saying, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And surfing helped me rethink a lot of things in life because with surfing, as you're saying, there sometimes isn't a next thing, right? Sometimes the point of surfing is to do it. And that sounds so obvious. And then at the same time, it's not how I lived the rest of my life, right? When I was at the White House, I was writing for the senior staff and I loved my job. And then I thought, okay, but I'd really love to write for the president. And then I think, okay, what kinds of speeches haven't I written for the president? I want to do that. And being driven in that way, I'm not against it. But it can also drive you crazy if you're not careful.
Mm. But like that's such it's a good analogy because if you're going to write a speech for the president, you don't have to be a good science fiction writer to do that. You just have
That's true.
you can compress your writing into a particular direction and actually get good at that. And that's what I think is similar about surfing. I think a lot of surfers that come in, especially, since COVID, a lot of adult learners are coming in, and the surfboard industry is just wants you to be a performance shortboarder and feeds you nothing but Kelly Slater and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's really puts a lot of people off and makes people not really progress as fast as they should. But when you sort of approach surfing as more of an art form and it's you choose your path and it doesn't matter, then it almost makes it easier. It takes a lot of pressure off as well.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, you talked about flow earlier, and I think that's such a huge part of surfing for everybody, no matter what age, experience level, proficiency level you're at, right? Almost everyone is chasing that flow. And it is true. I feel like boards are never marketed as this will help you, at your level, feel what you're trying to feel. They're all like, it is this, as you're saying, it feels like a path sometimes. Although I think the other thing that is changing, it's interesting because the surf industry, I think, has been pretty welcoming of all the adult learners because we're customers. No question, there's definitely some surfers who are like, wait a second, what are you doing here? And I get that. I'm not trying to say that I don't understand it, but I do think and also some of that, by the way, is jealousy because on my part, or on the part of adult learners, or something fascinating about surfing is, when I'm in Jersey on a steep day, and I have yet to get barreled. That is, I've gotten into the barrel, I've just never gotten out. And and I watch, someone get barreled on a like steep, head high wave in Jersey at low tide, and I know that they're not just doing something I don't yet know how to do, they're feeling something I've never felt before. And that's kind of again different with surfing, right? Like if I could run a 6-minute mile, I don't think I would experience a brand new feeling. I think I'd just be going faster. Whereas if I get barreled, I know that's a feeling I just can't describe yet. And that I think is really cool, right? You're always chasing unlocking these new feelings, these new perspectives, it looks different, right? You have the sense that the world looks different for each time you get to do something on a board you couldn't do before.
Yeah, it's getting barreled is it's far more complex than most people think. There's a lot going
I'm
on
learning that. Yeah.
in the barrel. I remember when I first, I'm sure you've been to Ripley's, believe it or not, in New York, and
No,
you
yeah.
haven't. Okay.
No, I didn't know there was one in New York. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, there's a,
I grew up there. I feel like that's the kind of stuff that's like tourist stuff we don't
yeah,
do.
exactly. Touche. But there's, when you exit, there's this giant spinning tube that has a bridge going through it, and there's all these
Mm.
LED lights on on the tube, and it's spinning. And I got about 2 steps into that tube, and I felt like I was going to fall over the edge. I felt like I was going to throw up. I had to turn around and go around the other way. And I was motion sick for a couple of days. Like it was a pretty
Jeez.
intense experience. And it made me realize, oh, that's why I can't get barreled, because
Huh.
there's a mismatch in my sensory perception. I was at the time I was also studying neurology, and
Yeah.
there was a mismatch. My peripheral sensory and my balanced sensory system knew that I was level, but my eyes were confused and I was like, that's the same as the barrel. No wonder I fall off every
Hmm.
time I'm in the barrel. So I went through this journey of really lining up my ocular and vestibular, well, your vision and your balance. And
Mm.
that only then could I get barreled. So uh,
Interesting.
you have to have almost have like an elite athlete balance and visual system to be able to go in the barrel, because there's so much going on. Hey, listeners, I just wanted to interrupt the show quickly to tell you about my new coaching program. It's called the Barrel Mastery Academy. It's 4 weeks of group coaching, all about how to come out of the barrel. As you heard in that little story, it's a very disorientating place. The reason you struggle to come out of the barrel isn't a lack of courage or wave reading skills, it's neurological issues. It's your vision, your balance, and your body awareness, either a combination of all those three or one of them. We're going to address all of that stuff in this 4-week program. Go to surfmastery.com to find out more and to sign up. Back to the show.
Like everything, right? When you watch people do it and they do it well, it looks so easy. And that's the chat. I was just weirdly, I was listening to the audiobook of a biography of Lorne Michaels, the guy who created and still runs Saturday Night Live.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the many, many sort of quotes that he apparently says often is the problem with making things look easy is that people think it's easy. And I think that's definitely, I imagine, true of a lot of surfers. My experience so far is this was last winter. Matt and I were out surfing. I had the guts to try to backdoor a wave. I got into the barrel. I had enough time to think, "Oh, holy crap, I'm in the barrel." And then my board hit me. Well, I had my hands up. It hit me where my face would have been if my hands hadn't been in front of it. So that's as far as I got. But I was like, "Oh, this feels different." It wasn't transcendent because it was mostly a board hitting me in my face, but it was like this definitely feels like a new experience. So hopefully, one day I'll get there.
Yeah, or like Jerry Lopez says, the first 20 years of surfing is just to test whether you're actually interested or not. And
Yeah. Oh, well, he didn't start at 35, I guess.
well, touche. Yeah, I was quite a late starter as well, and gosh, it was about 12 years into my surfing journey before I really got a proper barrel. So
Yeah.
it takes time.
Right.
Um,
It's
one of the things in the
yeah.
book you say is it's surfing is like a language that's trying to kill you, which is very funny,
Yeah.
but also very apt.
Well, the thing that when I started surfing, we've been talking about this idea that it's hard, but it doesn't look hard when you watch people who are doing it. And so when I started surfing, I thought, okay, I figured things out in my life, right? You learn, you figure out, all right, you get better at this thing, then you work on that other thing. And I've thought about that in other athletic things too, right? I grew up skiing, but it's just as a hobbyist, been a runner for a while, that sort of thing. I wrestled in high school, right? So I thought, okay, it's a sport. It's, it's like a language, right? You just kind of learn by building blocks. I didn't appreciate the extent to which there is so much of surfing is dealing with the fear and the kind of visceral panic that comes from being a tiny animal in a very big ocean, right? You're just like, oh, my whole evolutionary biology is exists to keep me out of here, and now I'm going into here, and that feels very different. And the first time, and I wrote about it in the book, the first time I got held down by a wave of any real size, I just that was the moment where I was like, oh no, this is not the same, even as skiing, right? I say, and I love skiing, but I say to people, it's like if every ski run started with an avalanche, right? Like it's a very different experience.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest barrier for people to, or I think it's why people take so long to learn surfing
Hmm.
is the fear, and not just the fear of the ocean, but the fear of shame.
Yes. I I I was shocked by this. That for me, I thought I was going to learn mostly physical stuff, right? I was like, okay, I'm going to practice my pop up and then I'm going to get better at popping up. And mostly I have to learn how to pop up. And it's true, I'm still working on my pop up. But for me, the real challenge of surfing has been learning to deal with fear, right? As you say, there's the fear of like, there's a big wave right behind me and it feels like it's going to kill me. How do I not chicken out? But there's also that fear, especially as an adult, where you're like, I'm going to look like an idiot a lot. And, I'm going to have like teenagers laughing at me and I'm going to feel less athletic than I've ever felt in my life. And yet I'm going to come back to the beach the next day and do it all over again. And if you can do it enough times and you can get your mind right about it, that becomes liberating. I often say I don't think that surfing has turned me into a different person, but I think it's made me maybe 10% better at dealing with that fear of shame and embarrassment. But 10% is a lot, right? That's enough to change your life. And I absolutely think without surfing, I wouldn't have had that knowledge that I have now.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's I think that's why kids learn a lot faster because they don't care how they look or they're
Yeah,
just
and you're
sort of
used to looking
playing.
like an idiot when you're a kid, right? Like, and it's okay, right? But it's cute. When I started surfing at 35, right, that's around the age where you're just like definitely not a young adult. You're not an old adult. You're just an adult. You're a regular adult. And so I'd started working at the White House when I was 24, and obviously the standards, at least in the Obama, I'm not commenting these days, but the standards at one time in the White House were very high. So it's not like you could learn on the job, but there was still a sense that youth was part of your identity, right? So you were figuring things out. People understood that. It was part of what made people excited about you. At 35, that starts to change a little bit. And so there's this idea if you're embarrassing yourself. You're not a young person figuring it out. You're just an adult who doesn't know what they're doing. And I think it's why a lot of adults stop learning new things because learning usually involves some amount of embarrassment, especially if you're learning something that you're going to do in public.
Yeah, that's very true. Out of all my research, there's only one surfer who started late in life that became any good at it, and that's Robert Weaver, Wingnut, from
Okay.
the Endless Summer 2. And
Yeah.
I was so surprised and confused when I found out he didn't start surfing till he was 17. I was like, that doesn't make sense. How do you get so good at surfing
Yeah.
and start so late? And then I got the pleasure of interviewing him, and it turns out he's been body surfing since he was 5.
Yes, that usually there's often that loophole, right? Like, well, so even this is obviously a lesser example of it, but so I've talked about surfing with my brother-in-law Matt, and that's a lot of what the book's about. And I was always like kind of annoyed because I'd say like, oh, how long did it take you to feel comfortable taking off on one of these head high waves that we get in hurricane season? And he was like, nah, I just always kind of did it, right? Like he wasn't, and I was, where did that come from? But on the other hand, he skateboarded for a long time, even though he started surfing in his 20s, but he was a skateboarder for a while before that. And you can see that in his form, right? Where, he's not a pro surfer, but he is definitely somebody who is expressing himself on the wave and I write about this in the book, can definitely turn some heads when he kind of claws his way onto something steep. And I think that is, if he wasn't a skateboarder, I have to assume that he would be more in, at least I have to tell myself he'd be more in my situation. I thought that skiing would be helpful, and it was in certain ways, but in a lot of ways, it was just not similar enough.
I grew up skateboarding as well, and it's the concrete is brutal. So
Yeah, I
far
would
more than
imagine.
snow.
Yeah, I want to get in. I have a surf skate, and I just like we're talking about fear. The fear of embarrassment is wearing all the pads and being like the adult at a skate park, not knowing what they're doing, and then the fear of, physical injury is concrete seems a lot less fun to fall on than the ocean.
Oh yeah, but you're right though. I mean, learning to, sort of working on your surfing technique on a surf skate style
Hmm.
skateboard is actually a really good way to sort of to lock it in.
Yeah, I got to start to do that. We were talking before. It's winter here, so maybe not for a couple of months, but all right.
Yeah.
2026 is going to be the year of the surfscape.
Yeah, as long as you get knee pads and real good wrist guards
Yeah.
and learn how to fall before you skate, which sounds
Oh, smart.
strange,
No,
but
no, that makes sense.
like running up a ramp and sliding down it on your knees and your hands like a kid might
Mm.
do, and just learning how to, instead of land hard, bang, but learn how to actually slide with it.
Oh, I see. Okay, I'm glad we had
So,
this talk. This
yeah,
that was not what I would have done.
yeah.
I would have just tried it and then probably not tried it again after I got hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, just really good knee pads and really good wrist guards
Mm.
is what you need, and a helmet, obviously,
Yeah.
and let go
That
of all
that
that
makes a lot of
shame.
sense.
Easy as that.
Yep, that's yeah, just do those things and you'll be all set.
Yeah, I actually just working on an article at the moment about how saying that good surfers are stoics by
Hmm.
default because surfing teaches you stoicism without you realizing it.
I
And
like that idea. Tell me more about that.
yeah, well, I mean, courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom, and all of the Stoic virtues and things that the Stoics talk about. I've been reading a lot of Ryan Holiday recently, and I was
Hmm.
like, surfing teaches you all of that stuff just by force, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's
And
interesting because it's got this kind of hippie reputation, right?
mm,
But when you do it, so unlike I wrestled in high school, right? Wrestling is a character building sport for sure. That's what you call something if it's kind of unpleasant. But that's got a very macho reputation. Whereas surfing has this reputation, especially for people who don't surf, of being very laid back, very chill, very California. But then, as you're saying, right, a lot of these virtues are much more like traditional sort of classical virtues.
mm, yeah, definitely. I think that hippie reputation came from, gosh, if you could wind back the clock and go to First Point Malibu, where the water's
Hmm.
warm and the waves are really easy and it's not crowded,
Right.
surfing pretty is a lot simpler and a lot less dangerous. Now
Yep.
that's sort of that's a bubble, obviously, a bit of an outlier. Whereas, if you
Yeah.
want to be a good surfer and surf all conditions and stuff, you need to be a bit more stoic than hippie.
Yeah. Well, and surfing is interesting because the things that I've done more of in life, right, involve either the comedy world or the political world. And those are also two universes where people think they really understand them, even if they have no real experience as a practitioner, right? And surfing, because of the Beach Boys, because of there's a vibe, right? There's all kinds of stuff. I always think that, right, United Airlines is the airline where I happen to have my most of my frequent flyer miles. And all of their advertising for like sign up for United credit card and get however many free frequent flyer miles, it's a picture of a surfboard, right? It's like the iconography has become so that
Mm.
everyone feels they understand what surfing is. And I think weirdly, having now been surfing for a couple of years, I think it's mostly given me an understanding of how little I get it. Where I think I would have said, "Oh, I kind of get that before." Okay, well, I see the whatever the T-shirt with the surfboard on it, and I listen to the Beach Boys. I know the vibe, and now I'm like, oh no, there's a lot more, and it's a lot more complicated. And as you say too, right? Like in all kinds of parts of the world that are not very Californian in attitude.
Yeah. I mean, surfing, it's like we said before, like that moment where you're on a wave, even if it's for 3 seconds, we will go through so much to get another
Hmm.
taste of that.
Yeah.
And we forget
Well, one
about the
yeah.
struggle we went through to get it.
It is. It happens to me all the time where I'm like, okay, this has been a tough session, or we've been talking about surfing in New Jersey in the winter, right? It's like I'm freezing cold, I can't feel my feet, and I'm just gonna get one more wave. But then you get that wave, and you're like, oh, I should get one more after that. Totally forgot that it took 45 minutes, and it's snowing out and freezing. You say, oh, the next one, I'll just grab real quick. And there's all kinds of ways you can talk yourself into staying out, which is a good thing in some ways. But it's funny to me. I mean, I think part of this too, and I think I had a big chunk of this in the book. There's a lot of things in the book that I ended up having to cut because they were very specifically for surfers and no one else, right? Like there was my editor who has surfed a couple of times in his life, but and likes reading about it, but isn't a non-surfer. He was like, you can't write about like board shapes this much, right? No one outside surfing is ever going to read your book if you have, pages and pages that are about a fish versus a mid-length versus a longboard. And so I cut that. But another thing I cut was this idea that wave energy is just not something you interact with at all as a human being, right? In other words, going back to skiing, just because it's what I'm familiar with, gravity I know how that works. Centrifugal force, right? I know how that works. Now skiing is I love skiing, but you can kind of guess what it feels like to have gravity and centrifugal force acting on you. Wave energy is totally foreign, right? It's like being on an alien planet. And that is a very addictive thing, I think.
It sure is. The neutral ground, the great equalizer, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how
Well, it
good you
is.
are at something else, surfing will humble you.
Yeah, and everyone's chasing some version of the same thing, right? I have absolutely found myself, yeah, I think about the trip that my brother-in-law and we took to the North Shore, right? Obviously, we were not the best surfers out there on the North Shore. We weren't even close. I'll speak for myself. I certainly wasn't close. But I was chasing the same thing as some of these guys who were going after the big set waves that I was not going anywhere near. And again, we're chasing very differently. I'm not trying to compare myself in skill level, but I do think there is that sense of equal ground that says we're all out here looking for some version of the same feeling we can't find anywhere else. And when you're in the lineup, you also just don't know that much about other people, right? You don't know their politics, you don't know culturally who they are, you don't know what they do for a living, right? If you're out in the lineup with strangers in that moment, it feels very equal, or at least it feels very leveling, right? It may not be equal once you get into the kind of meritocracy of who gets priority on a wave, but it's a new society, right? On land, none of that stuff matters in the same way.
Yeah, oh, definitely. If it wasn't for surfing, what sort of relationship do you think you would have with your brother-in-law?
It's interesting. I got asked that recently, and if I get asked things like that enough, I'm like, I gotta ask Matt what he thinks. So I haven't asked him yet. I think we probably would kind of be where we were at the start of all of this, or kind of during the pandemic, which is kind of not hostile, but just like you're there, I'm there. Hey, how you doing? All right, good to see you. And I would have been. I wouldn't speak for him. I would have been a little judgier of some of his choices in life. I'm sure of that. And I will also say, as we kind of entered this new era, right, Trump 2.0 in the United States, I think I would have felt uh, less curious about sort of his life. Not and he's not like a Trump, like a big Trump guy or anything, but he is culturally and kind of all of the demographic fault lines in the United States that are, I'm sure wherever you are right now, you're kind of seeing play out, right? Matt and I are on opposite sides of all of those just by coincidence. And so I think I probably would have not I've seen him less. And I say this with a little bit of, we've talked about shame and embarrassment. I'm embarrassed to say it, but I think I would have seen him less as an individual person and more as a kind of demographic type. And then I would have wondered why he wasn't, friendlier to me. So I'm glad I started surfing, I guess is what I'm saying.
And have you guys sort of pushed and pulled each other from either side of the political spectrum to gain some understanding and maybe even changed a few extreme opinions?
Yeah, I think so in certain ways. I mean, I kind of always say like you can't, I'd ask him about how he's changed because that is also part of what I learned, right? It's like when you try to just think you know what's going on in someone else's head, you're usually wrong. But even little stuff, right? Like I remember, so in New Jersey, there we have a law, the plastic bag ban, right? You can't use plastic bags. You have to bring a reusable bag. And I remember when he was talking about like complaining about that and saying, well, the reusable bags, they use up so much plastic. No one remembers to bring them, so you're always buying new ones. And I didn't really take that so seriously. I thought, oh, it's probably Joe Rogan said something about plastic bags and he's just repeating it. And the more I thought about it, and frankly, the more I realized that I was kind of being a jerk and not taking him seriously, right? And the more curious or open-minded I got, the more I thought, okay, that's actually a pretty good point, right? I still would like us all to use less plastic bags, but this is not if I was running New Jersey, I'd be like, let's come up with a different and better way to try to get people to use less of these things because this way is not working. And it's a small thing, but it's a big thing. I often say this with Matt, right? We went to Spain on a surf trip and we stayed in an Airbnb that happened to have an induction cooktop. And I've always been a fan of induction for climate purposes, right? It's cleaner, you can run it off electricity, hopefully you can run off clean energy. And Matt is now a big fan of induction because it cooks a breakfast burrito really quickly and evenly. And it's not that we came to the same place, but it's the kind of thing where if you don't step outside your comfort zone, you just don't encounter as many different things. And when you encounter new stuff, it's one of the best parts of being a human being. You learn things. And so I think both of us have learned a lot.
That's really cool. Surfing is complex outside of the water as well. If you could go back to speak to your beginner surfing self, what advice would you give yourself?
Start swimming. Uh, I mean, that's the surfing advice I'd give myself, right? It took me a lot, and I've actually gotten out of the habit. I got to get back into it. But it took me a long time to be like, oh, if I did when I'm not able to surf, if I just go to a pool and swim laps, that's going to help me last longer when I'm surfing. And I felt like when I was starting, the biggest hurdle was an hour in or 30 minutes in, I'd get exhausted, and then everything after that's just garbage, right? You're not going to learn when you can barely move. And so when I'm swimming laps, I can just get more out of each session. And I think if I was talking to a beginner surfer and they were getting hooked, right, like they were really getting into it, I would just be like, find a place where when you're not on a board, you can go swim laps. And then more emotionally, I think I did a lot of things right, but I think what I would say is kind of even more of that understand. The thing I wish I had known right from the jump, but an instructor that I had told me kind of quickly is to think about that question of are you better than you were before you went out that day, right? That I think is what changed for me, both surfing and made me think, oh, surfing could change my life, right? Was when I started to say, all right, yes, I went out, I got my ass kicked, I got up on one 2 foot wave, and other than that was just like pummeled by a series of sets that were the height of a garden gnome, right? Like I did not feel very proud of myself, but I'm a better surfer than I was before I paddled out, and let's not lose sight of that. And once I started to think about that in other parts of my life, it really changed how I thought about all kinds of aspects of life. And I think it's a big part of what helped me get out of that period of depression I was in when I started.
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't really regret a surf.
No, it's amazing how rarely Matt and I say this to each other a lot, especially when it's cold in New Jersey, right? It's just better to be surfing than not. And there are really very few instances where I think, oh, back when I was like dithering before I'm sitting in my warm home office saying, do I really want to go out today? Or I'm looking at the cameras and maybe it's like bigger than I'm used to, it's a little scary. And I say, all right, I'll go for it. Right. It is very rare that I've said to myself, oh, I wish I hadn't. Almost always, I'm just really glad I got out there. And obviously, that's within some limits. There's been days when it's double overhead in New Jersey, and I thought, okay, well, I will just watch patiently from the beach, and that's cool. But within those limits, almost always you regret not going, but you don't regret going.
Yeah. How would you describe your relationship with surfing in the ocean?
Well, that's a good question. I think that for me, a thing I had never experienced was just being out in the ocean at all. Right? I'd swum a little bit in the ocean, so you go to the beach, you duck under some waves, but that experience of just staying there And I think it gave me like a new appreciation and respect, but a new appreciation for just being present in the ocean and for being in one spot. I'm the kind of person, I tend to be moving around a lot, right? I tend to like the kind of person who says, okay, maybe there's a hike, right? I'm not, I don't want to sit on the beach. I want to go for a walk. And so to be in one spot or one relatively, just one break for a long time and it's really paying attention to it, right? Really trying to understand that one wave or the conditions that one day, you start to notice stuff. And that I think has been really one of my favorite things about surfing, especially in winter in Jersey, right? Like otherwise I would never go out in the ocean in the middle of winter. What am I crazy? And sometimes you see really cool stuff out there, right? We've got some cool birds. Every so often you'll see a whale or some dolphins, stuff that you never imagined you would see really beautiful. And we have great sunsets in New Jersey, very underrated sunsets. And I was out the other day, and I more or less still dark, and I caught a couple waves, which was nice. But also, like, there is just a great sunset I never would have seen, and definitely not from that perspective. So that feels like such a gift, right? Just to be able to spend time out there.
Yeah. Oh, it sure does. Yeah, surfing is it's holistic. And something you mentioned there was like, I mean, that is how you get better at surfing is looking for more and more details in
Hmm.
in what's going on in the ocean. And I'm the same. I'm someone who never feels sitting still is boring. And but if I can just lock into sitting there and scanning that little sliver of horizon, trying to predict the next set, where it's coming, where it's going to break, and reading the little details on the
Yeah.
wave, all the secondary waves and the wind chops and all that jazz. The more focused and detailed you get to reading and predicting the ocean, that is what makes the difference, and that's what separates great surfers from good ones.
Yeah. Well, and it reminds me of writing a little bit in that if you just start writing, you might think, okay, I want to write like big stories, and you have this idea for the finished product. But if you talk to writers, they're almost all the kinds of people who say, oh, I really want to dig into that sentence, right? Yes, I also want to do the big stuff. But it's not that the sentence is boring. It's that until you really get into it, you don't know why a sentence is so interesting. Why rereading the same paragraph over and over again, you learn something, or rereading a book you really love, right? You learn something new every time. And so I think with surfing, and a lot of things that involve that kind of learning. The more you do it, the more you grow to appreciate the little things. And not in a like Zen kumbaya way, but just in a way of saying, "Oh, I didn't realize how much complexity there was and how much there was to learn." It's like so many things in life. When you don't know a lot, you think there's not that much to learn. And then the more you know, the more you say, "Oh, there's a lot out there I don't know at all."
That's a good point. That's a great analogy. Yeah, because sometimes we read a sentence, especially poetry, and think, "Oh, wow, what an amazing sentence!" And
Yeah.
you want to read it again, and then you think, "Oh," then maybe the poet rewrote that sentence 100 times before each word or
Hmm.
each comma was correct. And so, yeah, there's the details. Hmm.
Yeah.
When, why writing? When writing? When did your writing ability and passion begin?
Well, I was always a reader, right? I was one of those kids that just loved to read. And I think most writers I know, that's kind of how you start, right? In the way that probably most chefs started is like they really like to eat. When I was in college, I thought I was going to do comedy writing. I did stand-up comedy when I was in high school growing up in New York. And I got to college, I did improv, I edited a humor magazine. So that's where the writing sort of started from, was me saying, oh, I want to do comedy. And so I want to write jokes and I want to write funny stuff. And then I also had a couple of writing teachers in college who were really great. So much of it I think, comes down to like you have people who have done it who believe in you, that you can do it. And I have a lot of respect for people who just use pure willpower to say, like, I believe in myself, even though I don't know anybody who, can mentor me. But for me, I felt like with writing, I had a sense that this was possible. Then I ended up in DC, and when I moved to DC in 2009, I thought I wanted to do healthcare policy because I worked as a field organizer for Barack Obama, and obviously, United States famously without universal healthcare, and we had a lot of volunteers I talked to. I could see what the healthcare system was doing to them. And it turns out I'd be terrible at that. But I found there was a speechwriting firm with former Clinton speechwriters, right, who had worked in the White House. And very early on, one of them said to me, I think if you kept doing this, you could write in the White House one day. And I thought, okay, I didn't believe him, but that meant a lot to me. And that sense of someone who's saying, I've done it, and I believe that if you work at it, you can do it. I mean, that's a really powerful thing in someone's life.
Side note, I think it's your surfing book is funny. It's very funny.
Well, thank you.
Um,
Yeah, I know, I think trying to, I think it's fair to, I don't, yeah, I was going for like the funniest surfing book, but I don't think the bar is super high. There's some irreverent surfing books. So it's not but it's not a crowded category. There's really not that many surfing books, actually. There's some, but compared to a lot of, fly fishing books, there's so many fly fishing books. I love a good fly fishing book, right? The baseball, there's a million baseball books. There's not that many surfing books.
yeah, no, you're right. You're right. But it's such a fresh take. Like, obviously, you're a very good writer. You're well thought, and then you came to surfing already a writer, so you could articulate the experience as an adult beginner so well. I'll be honest. Like when I first, once we had sort of confirmed this interview, I was like, oh, I suppose I got to read this book about surfing from this beginner, and then
Right.
I was pleasantly surprised at how many times I was just laughing at your takes on the surf industry and the surf coaches and also, I learned a lot about what the journey is like starting surfing as an adult now, sort of in the 2000s, because I was a late starter, but I was still, 18.
Right.
And it was, 20 years ago. What I'm trying to say is that those who are listening to this podcast, my audience, you might have the same thing. Oh, what do I want to? But no, read this book. It's very funny. It's a great take on surfing. You empathize with new surfers. You get a new look on surfing itself. It actually inspired me to go surfing. Reading the book.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. No, for me, and I don't know what it says about me, but one of my favorite experience as a writer is to win over a skeptic, right? So my favorite, when I say reviews, like, on Amazon or Goodreads or something, right? My favorite positive reviews are from people who are like, like, why would I pick up a book about surfing? I've never thought about surfing in my life. Surfing bores me, and I love this book, right? For that, I'm always happy if somebody says that. But then also the same thing, right? Of people who say, because one of my biggest fears when this book came out was that people who have spent their whole lives surfing or large parts of their life surfing would see this as presumptuous or not of value to them. And so the fact that there's, what you're saying, and I've heard from other people, which makes me feel good, right, is like that like that, all right, I was skeptical. There's good reason to be skeptical, but I get what you were trying to do, which was specific, and I found something for me in it, even though we've had very different experiences. Right? To me, that's how I feel about writing in general, right? Of like when I read something I really love and I say, oh, I have no idea, fiction or nonfiction, right? That's not me at all. And yet somehow we can connect, right? I love that. That's why you keep doing it.
Yeah, almost felt like the book was written for me, but I can also see how it was written for lots of different people. It's very well written.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, if we can keep going with the praise. I'm fine with that. No, but I really do appreciate it. I guess it's one of the things you asked me like when I started writing and kind of and I would say for me, right, writing is like surfing in that, and I've been writing a lot longer than I've been surfing, and I'm much better at it. And I say that just because I've been doing it for longer. But I would say every week, maybe every couple of days, I want to quit, right? Like the number of times my wife has heard me be like, maybe I should just give up on the whole writing thing because it's really hard. And the version for me of that feeling of being on a wave and you're kind of in a different dimension is when you make a connection with a reader, right? That it's not just the getting your own ideas out in the world, but it's that moment when you feel like you and another human being have somehow connected, even though you may not have anything else in common. That's very cool. And it's hard to get that from, you certainly can get it from a lot of other experiences, but it's hard, especially if you're me and you're not good at music.
Yeah, well, that could be your next.
I
Yeah.
almost failed eighth grade clarinet, so yeah, that version of human connection was out.
Oh yeah. Ha- Have any lessons you learnt from writing helped you to learn how to surf, and have any lessons you learnt from surfing helped you to be a better writer?
Well, definitely surfing has helped my writing. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, that idea of saying I'm better than I was before, right? You have a really just crap day, and instead of saying I let myself down, you say I got better. And writing, it's not unlike surfing in that you can have just a really unproductive session, right? And it's not the ocean pummeling you, right? It's the inside of your own mind. And either because there's too much there or there's nothing there. Why did I even think that I had the right to try to sit down in front of a blank screen and create something? And if you beat yourself up about that, it just makes you do it again the next day and you don't learn anything. So I started to say, hey, okay, this was, if I get up in the morning and I thought, oh, I'm gonna write 1,500 words, they're gonna be great, and I write 200 words and they're garbage, to say, all right, fair enough, but I'm better writer than I was before I wrote this down. Right? Just by doing it, I got better. That's been really, really helpful. As a writer going into surfing, I don't know that it's been quite the same. I don't know that being a writer and it makes you any better at learning to surf. I think it's probably for me been the other way.
It's a really good mantra, though. Just remembering, I'm a little bit better than I was. It's sort of a great
Yeah,
surfing philosophy that is valid for anything else in life.
absolutely. Because then you also start to chase experiences because you'll learn stuff, right? Like and some of this is cliche, and a lot of cliches are cliches because they're true, right? You start to think rather than am I going to succeed or fail, you start to think about the process. You start to say, okay, what decision is going to lead to me growing more as a person rather than which decision is going to be comfortable and kind of give me a prize or a gold star or whatever, right? Often the stuff that pushes you the most that you learn from is not the stuff that feels like a success. And it's not so much that you're learning from failure, it's that you're learning from frustration, right? Like you aren't able to do something, and that's why you get better at it. If you could do it, you're not better. And I think I will say that's again, we're talking about probably surfing helping me as a writer. I really have to remind myself these days if I go out and it's like a nice 2 to 3 foot day, really mellow, maybe in the summer, I feel like Kelly Slater, right? I can catch anything I want and I can do whatever I want on these admittedly pretty small waves on my admittedly pretty big board. But I feel, I'm really feeling myself. And then having to remember that's actually like that might be fun. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not success, right? Because if I'm not wiping out at least a little bit, then I'm not pushing myself
Hmm.
far enough. And so the real days where I think, okay, that was successful, you get a good wipeout in, right? You're like, oh, I didn't know what I went a little too far. And that I think is also true for writing, right? When I try to write, I'm trying to figure out what my next book is going to be now. But as I think about it, one of the things I want to do with every book or writing project is say, what's a muscle I haven't really developed before as a writer? With this book, I thought a lot about descriptions of place, right? Just descriptive writing, because that's not, I can do it, but it's not where I start as a writer. And so I was like, I really want to focus on that.
Hmm.
And so everything I try to think about, how do you do something you're bad at, or at least not as good at?
Hmm. Maybe you'll pick up the guitar.
Maybe. I don't I you know it's fun. I will say, so I'm 39 now, and I feel like the days of picking up the guitar and that being cool might be over for me. So now I'll have to do it despite it not being cool, but I feel a little better about that. No, I think I forget who it was who said that all comedians want to be musicians, and I think that's largely true. There's plenty of writers. There's something about music, but I also think that one of the things I love as I write more is you start to be able to hear the musicality in language. And especially it's also a really nice thing about speech writing, which, obviously I did professionally for a while and I still do sometimes occasionally. And a good speech certainly has a rhythm, right? It's not the same as a song, but it has a lot is more in common than you think.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, a good speech is almost poetic.
Yeah, and there's that sense, right, that silence has a lot, and especially when it's delivered well, right? Silence, these kind of crescendos that can build. President Obama was very good at that, especially at the end of speeches, right? You could give him a very long run-on sentence, and he could sort of he could turn it into a crescendo. Whereas if you gave that to most speakers, they wouldn't know what to do with it, right? It would be like giving a really complicated piece of music to someone who's like good but not great at the guitar, they would struggle with it. But someone really good can take that and turn it into something special.
Yes. Well, I think you took your experience as an adult learner surfer in the surfing world and, molded that in with some psychology and some relationship stuff. And it's a great book. And
Oh,
I
thank you.
think so. David Litt, author of It's Only Drowning, go and get it. It's on Audible as well for those who obviously like listening to podcasts. David, very well read, by the way. Not on,
I had to like even try some accents for that one.
yeah,
Talk about things that I was scared to do.
yes, no, it's very well read. So you're a good writer and you're a good speaker. I'm assuming you've had some media training as well. So well done. Yeah, but again, David, thank you so much for taking the time. I urge listeners to go out and check out David's book.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Surf Mastery podcast. That was David Litt with 2 T's. His book, It's Only Drowning, is available on Amazon and Audible. Go to surfmastery.com for more free surfing advice. I've got free PDFs, there's courses available, there's blog posts, and of course this podcast itself is a timeless resource of surfing education. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. Until next time, keep surfing.